Thank you for watching the Housing Oregon YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe. Slide decks from the presenters are going to be available below. Thanks for watching.
We're here today to talk a little bit about communities for all ages. And the agenda is introductions, panel discussion, and then Q&A. We're going to try to stick to these timeframes. Certainly not going to go over. We may end a little early. It all depends on how the flow goes. Learning objectives are just understanding community for all ages framework and the asset-based community development model. What community for all ages programming and services benefits are to residents, and how design can leverage this framework for equitable housing. On the panel today, I'm Bill Lanning, principal at MWA Architects. I'll be the moderator.
Oh, hello. Okay. I'm Wendy Klein. I am a senior development manager at Community Development Partners. Am I supposed to talk about it? Okay.
I'm Julia Doty. I am the service programs manager for Community Development Partners.
I'm Laura Spidell. I'm the executive director for Engage Northwest, and we provide the resident services at Broadleaf Arbor.
Hi, I'm Nina Reed, and I'm a board member of the Northwest Oregon Housing Authority, and that is located for Columbia, Tillamook, and Clatsop counties. Welcome, everybody.
So we have a few different organizations represented up here. This slide I'm not going to walk entirely through, but I'm just going to emphasize the value of a mission and value aligned team and the work that goes into the process. This is not easy work that we do. And so, having a team that is aligned is fantastic, both to get the project through from start to, which can sometimes be 5 years, but also for the mental, how do I want to say, the fortitude, yeah, and knowing that you're going to be working with folks for that long, making sure that you're able to do that in a really meaningful and positive way. Oops. Okay, so what is Community for All Ages? This is not local. This is a global recognized process. It's something that's been around and been looked at for a number of years. Today, we're going to talk about what it means, though, through Community Development Partners, which is the organization that Wendy and Julia are with. They've developed a framework for this, and I'm going to let Wendy talk a little bit about that.
Oh, thank you, Bill. As a team at Community Development Partners, we are focused on creating intergenerational communities where both older adults, children, and families have an opportunity to coexist and live and play together. And so as a team, we developed a Community for All Ages think tank within Community Development Partners, and we developed a specific definition that is on the screen. It's the way that we're defining it is that it's an intentionally planned housing community that fosters intergenerational connection through design and services. And then sort of the caveat is it is a place for people of all ages to live, work, play, and thrive. And that is solely a Community Development Partners definition that has really guided our work to create these campus-style projects that are geared towards intergenerational living. Julia, do you have anything to add?
I think that pretty much covers it. Just to say, naturally occurring in lots of affordable housing projects that have a range of unit sizes, you're going to get older adults, younger individuals, and families with children already. And so the Community for All Ages concept is about how do you intentionally set up spaces and programming so that those groups are interacting with each other and benefiting from them all living there, as opposed to they just happen to be there and maybe they're going to interact. So a lot about the intentionality behind that concept. Is this microphone loud enough for everyone? Okay, just want to make sure. Oh, I see a few people asking for the volume to be a little bit higher. Is it me? Okay. Okay.
I was just going to interject on that. I wrote down a few items about what the values are of an intergenerational community. And some of those are creating health and wellness to that community, arts, creativity, lifelong learning, like storytelling, um, creating panels, parenting skills, exercise, and just where people can be given tools to grow, create, and explore their interests. So it's not just a place where you go in to your room and close the door. There's more to life and living when you're in this type of a community development.
And that starts to touch on why we care about creating communities for all ages. There's been both scientific research that's shown the positive effect of the intergenerational housing model. We know, and I'm going to let others talk about the challenge of funding different types of projects within the state based on the state's prioritizing of certain types of demographics. And then again, that mission alignment to the clients and the tenants that the developer is looking to serve, in this case, CDP. Do any panelists want to talk a little bit more about the importance of it? And yeah.
Is really big. But what happens is that our seniors, we've got so many seniors that don't have a place to stay or their income is so low. And we have to be able to place them into units that have like project-based vouchers and or have a housing choice voucher or a veterans VASH voucher. And so because the rents are getting so high, as you know, it is important that we really think of everyone too. I mean, the state is supporting us on the permanent supportive housing, and they're giving us money to help with that and support that. But we still can't forget our seniors, the disabled, and just the families. Just a mother or father who's got 3 children and able to afford what the market rent is. They can't afford it. And even at a 60% level, they can't based on their job and feeding 3 children.
I'd say, and then from the design side, I mean, I think we all realize that, creating a place for someone to live is the first goal, but it goes so far beyond that. And it's what's happening outside of the front door for those folks. And so creating an environment that is supportive of all of the different levels of people living, and just the fact that an autonomous group isn't as able to learn as well as as a more diverse group. So the framework that CDP has developed, Wendy, I can run through these, or if you want to talk more about them. In general, I think what CDP has developed is projects that are at 150 homes or greater to support their program. Bedroom sizes from 1 to 4. Looking at this as a campus environment, so there's multiple aspects to it, with a senior component being a standalone building, and then as well as the community service and those oriented spaces. Then family housing, in multiple forms, and we'll look at that a little bit farther or longer in this project. The community space that is necessary for these projects, just the different types of spaces and different resources and access to those spaces. It looks like, kind of a 2/3, 1/3 development, 2/3 being family housing and 1/3 to senior housing. Then that intergenerational focused service partner, and those, what is coming to the site, what's coming to the homes and to the residents to help support them, again, outside of their actual house. That programming that comes with it, along with the asset-based community development with the support of local leaders. I don't know if
And just to sort of underline, this is the Community Development Partners Framework that we've established as a development team. This is no way prescriptive to anybody that wants to do intergenerational housing. But, when we developed our sort of our group to come up with what the criteria would be to have an intergenerational community for all ages project, when we took into account the cost to do resident services, intergenerational programming, we knew that we needed 150 plus units to make that pencil in the pro forma. And we also knew that we should do a kind of a 1/3 to 2/3 older adults to family housing. So typically we have 1 and 2 bedrooms for the older adults, and then the family housing is 2 to 4 bedrooms. I don't know, Julie, if you have anything to add about the services.
Yeah, I mean, just to echo what you already said, Wendy, I think knowing that, again, with the intentionality behind trying to create the programming and the spaces that's going to encourage people to get together, we're going to need a lot of units in order to pay for the really robust services that we know we're going to need that Laura's team is providing on site. And to highlight that, I mean, I think there's another intergenerational model that a lot of folks are familiar with in Bridge Meadows, and Bridge Meadows has a flipped combination of units. So they tend to have about 75% senior units to 25% family units. And so all to say, I think there's a lot of different ways to go about the model. This is really just the CDP formula, but just to give an idea of where we started, and then I think we'll delve a little bit into how it's working in like early operations too.
So up here with me is representation from 4 of the groups, but there were obviously more partners involved in this process. So, Wendy and Julia are with CDP, Nina with NOAA, Laura with Engage, myself with MW Architects. The contractor on the project was LMC Construction. Early in the process, the city or not the city, but Nina and CDP engaged the Center for Public Interest and Design through PSU. Guardian Management is the property manager who was, involved in the process of the development. And when I say development, I should take a step back. We are going to actually be talking about a project in St. Helens, Oregon called Broadleaf Arbor, which was the first project that CDP has developed under the CFAA model. And then there's a lot of supplemental service providers that were also involved that were critical to the process in terms of generating, again, the support for the project in the community, along with long-term partners to make the project a success. Nina, I know you were very involved in getting not interest, but getting those partners on board. I don't know if there's anything more you'd want to say to that.
When NOAA was approached by community development partners and they brought forward this idea of the intergenerational piece, it actually thrilled me because all of you who have been in housing, you all have seen where everyone needs some more services and help. I mean, it just helps with their lives, right? And just makes it a little bit better. So with that, Wendy and her team asked me if they could come out to St. Helens. And I said, well, let me show you. Let me show you St. Helens. I'll take you to everybody. I'll drive you here to the library. I'll take you down here to the riverfront. I'll take you and meet some of our judges. I'll have you meet this person. Let's go to the food bank. Let's go here, because you will definitely need this when you have a community for all ages. If you don't have your community to back you with 150 plus units, remember, that's 300 people. We're all in close, real intimate here. Real intimate. You've got to make sure you've got services that help one another, and also, a plan and some very, very friendly residential services, property managers, maintenance staff, that are trauma informed to help everyone try to live together and learn together to be good neighbors. So what we did was we invited the Center for Public Interest Design, and they are a research and action center at PSU, and they aim to investigate your city, promote it, engage in inclusive design practices that will address the growing needs of our underdeveloped city. And so they do this not only here, but they do it worldwide. I mean, I think Sergio's been to Spain and Portugal, Italy, all over. They just go all over. And what they do is we pinpoint all the areas of what we have for health services, where our school districts are in location to the property. We look at where our mental health building is, where all the drugstores are, where Walmart is, where the next urgent care is, right? And those kinds of items so that we can get an idea when we go to the city to get our building permits and when we work with them, because we're going to be working with them very hard, we want to be able to show them that we've done the research of what our needs are, what the amenities will need, and what's, where the nearest parks are, the libraries, and where are we in location? Because sometimes you can build and it's too far out, and transportation will be an issue for them to walk to get to places like Safeway or wherever they need to go. So you need to know how many grocery stores you've got in town and these kinds of things. So it was really, really a wonderful, wonderful treat for us to have them come out, see the layout of the whole town, what we had, and also meet people in the city and our port, and just anybody that I could reach out to them. So anyone in the city that you're building in, it's important you've got kind of a connector, right? Because you're going to need your community action teams. You're going to need a lot of help. Even dentists, you're going to, whoever wants to help you out, to help people, or your health services. So they provide a Center for Public Interest in Design. They provided this booklet for us so that we could really see the research that was done on our property, and give us recommendations. That is what they did. And we followed their recommendations for design and for amenities also. Thank you.
And I'll just mention quickly, the work that went into creating this sort of partner cohort of these supplemental service providers from a resident services perspective has been hugely valuable to us. We meet monthly still with these partners and the other property partners to share ideas and resources for the residents at Broadleaf Arbor and for the larger St. Helens community. So having those partner resources really embedded in the development and then the operations of the project has been really valuable.
And I'll just say, I know that, CPID's work in producing this report and doing a lot of the background research is incredibly important. But I always say, I'm sort of joking, but also sort of serious. What every project actually needs is a Nina, like someone whose energy and enthusiasm is going to get, the existing community members really excited about a project and keep them engaged long-term. Because as Bill mentioned, we're talking about a years-long process. So talking to your community partners about housing that's going to be available for their client base in 4 years is kind of a hard selling point. And this MOU cohort that's listed here, I mean, these folks were part of the early original conversations. And I think Wendy did a tremendous amount of the work to keep that cohort engaged. And now we still meet monthly on site every single month as a group to talk about the property and also just like community issues that are going on. What are new resources? How can we work better together? So it's becoming more of like a community resource hub. And just so much of that has to do with like early enthusiasm from existing community members about the project.
Just to add, if there's any developers in the room, this cohort of community partners were sort of in inception, they were always kind of part of the project. But if there's any development folks, what I did is I sent them, monthly or every 2 months, I sent them updates of where we are in construction. Hey, we're 25% complete. And I sent them pictures just so they could start to understand, okay, this is when the project's going to be ready. This is when we're going to start meeting on site. This is when, I need to bring the school bus out to see if it can make the turns, on the campus project. And so to keep them informed, even if, construction is going to take 2 years, 3 years, I think was really helpful to make sure that they're always engaged and that we're thinking of them and that we need them to be our partners in this project.
Thanks, guys. As you can imagine, finance and compliance is a big aspect of the projects. And Wendy, it'd be great if you could talk a little bit about the benefits of this CFA model related to that.
Absolutely. I'm not sure if anybody's read the most recent OHCS QAP. And I actually haven't, so I don't know what it says. But, when this project was being conceived of, the real push was to do bigger family units. So through the LIFT program, there was a big push to do 3 and 4 bedroom units. And so we did want to have a considerable amount of those bigger family units in the project, so we could, adhere to the the requirements of OHCS and the QAP and what they found. Now, of course, when we scoured the Northwest Oregon Housing Authority's wait list, what we actually found was that the majority of folks that needed housing that were on NOAA's wait list were folks that wanted 1 bedrooms and that were older single adults. So there was a discrepancy between what we saw in the QAP and what we were actually seeing on the ground. So I would encourage everybody to read the QAP, bring out all their wait lists, and make sure that we're prioritizing the right populations. I mean, of course, we need to house everybody, but we were actually quite stunned that there were really the majority of folks that needed units they wanted 1 bedrooms. So how do we win the funding, right? But adhere to the QAP, but still house the folks that are on the wait list. So what we decided to do is do that kind of 1/3, 2/3 split. So we could house families, and then we could also house those that wanted, 1 bedroom units. So what that does for the model is, you've got those bigger family units generating that income. You've also got 1/3 of those units as 1 bedrooms, and then, coupled with project-based vouchers, that's sort of a win-win. What we also did is we didn't do a separate set aside for senior units because we didn't want to create a separate project. We wanted it to be a collective project, that didn't have a separate 8609 for the senior building specifically, because this is supposed to be intergenerational. So what we did is we created a preference for seniors, which we'll probably talk about later on the slides, and really how that actually manifested. So we could be more flexible. So in case, we didn't see folks, 55 plus applying, and we saw, more single family households that wanted a 1 bedroom for, the kid and the caregiver. So we wanted to keep it flexible. So that helps with the financial model. We're not, we don't have any specific set asides. We're keeping our population preference flexible so we can adapt as the climate changes, which I think is key where, in this day and age where, preferences change kind of almost yearly.
So I'm sorry, did you have a question, ma'am? It's part of the plan, hopefully. Yeah. So with this project, there were 3 key design considerations in looking at the process and what Nina talked about with the Center for Public Involvement. Really looking at the community, what the resources available were, and how those patterns worked around the site location. The circulation both outside of and off-site, as well as on-site, and the layout of course, the buildings and the homes themselves. The connectivity was a very important aspect of this. Again, both within the planned project and then outside to the greater neighborhoods. And then an inclusive design process because of the desire to design for multiple ages and generations and not having specific set-asides, looking at that across the board and across the site. And as you can imagine, this was to provide the number of homes that were provided, 239 homes between 1 and 3 bedrooms. It was a considerably large property. Right, this model is showing some of the work that that was done by Center for Design. So this is also that view of the asset-based community development model, where really looked at what was available in the community to then reinforce the site selection and where this project was going to be located, and understand what resources were in the immediate vicinity, along with those other resources in the community that could come to the site and work with the residents as needed. And this is a lot of what Nina was talking about before with her outreach to a number of organizations within St. Helens, as well as reinforcing and being able to go back to those leaders within the city and really show them, that this was the right project for the right location, and that St. Helens had the opportunity to support this. I don't know.
The asset-based community model. Okay, on the site. Oh, okay. So as you can see, the picture on the right is the development, and on the left, all those dots, are all different areas of grocery stores and amenities that are within a certain mile radius or walking distance, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. And so they provided this to us. The site that we purchased is the old trash site in St. Helens. And it's about 16 acres. And there were two pieces there. And as you can see, we're very close to the Columbia River. And in the middle there is our piece on where the circle is there. You can see the dark piece there. That's where Broadleaf is right there. I don't know if you can point to it, but don't fall, Bill, whatever you do. Okay. Yeah, so there it is there. And so anyway, this is a 16-acre piece with right on the side of inside the 16 acres. I'm not sure exactly, but Wendy will know this. Is it 6 or 7 acres of wetlands? 4.8. Well, there you go. There you have it. Okay. So 4.8 acres is wetlands, which one of the amenities you'll get to is the design, which Center for Public Interest and Design, thought of this beautiful half-mile walkway around the whole development so that people could walk and enjoy. And we put certain plants and flowers and shrubbery and grasses and put, the Indian name and then the English name by it. And so people could actually get out and walk around. And again, these special details to Broadleaf Arbor, so much money involved, and that is why you have to keep this 150 plus unit available, unless you just have some pouring in cash that you can pay for all these extra things, because it does cost quite a bit. But so we'll go on.
And then a little bit more directly involved with the development. So as Nina said, this property was a little over 16 acres to the east. And sorry for having to split the slide, but the north half of the site is on the left-hand side. The southern half of the site is on the right-hand side. So to the east is that wetlands, the 4.8 acres that Nina was talking about. Working with that, the kind of irregularity of the site and the property, it fronts in one part onto Highway 30, along with the railroad right there that runs all along 30 through that area. And then there's some commercial development around it. The high school is just across Highway 30, so in close proximity. There's a Safeway and a Walmart and some other directly connected retail services, which are great. But it's also a very busy part of town, being one of the main thoroughfares from kind of the older downtown area of St. Helens, and then to the more commercial area that's developed along Highway 30. Yeah.
Get a good look at this. All right, so I just wanted to show you this.
Hey, Nina.
Barbara, you can see there's 11 buildings. Okay, there's 11 buildings. And the greatest part about this is that we are called a gathering place. And you want your tenants to be able to gather in places where, they're not getting wet and talking to their neighbor and things like that. So there's several places where they can gather. Up in this area, number 10, this is a playground for the kids. And there's lots of areas for you to sit down and watch your kids. We'd like the parents to watch their children. but sometimes they don't. But anyway, this is an area where they can. This is all green space. And the windows here, you can look out these huge, large front windows. They're not tiny. So you can see your children playing, or you can imagine maybe sports or storytelling out here or what have you. We have at our main building, I'm hoping I'm looking at here's our main building. These are our mailboxes, and it's all under a covered area where people can gather, pick up their UPS, FedEx. They can talk, and we've got how far is our roof line over? It's pretty far. I mean, it's like 15 feet over. Hi. And so anyway, so there's places for people to gather. Here is the walking trail that takes you around, and you can get really good exercise for that. Again, it's just getting people together, the people wanting to walk and get some weight off or whatever, and then, a little amphitheater area where we can have, gatherings. And then over in the senior area right here, this senior area, we've got a resource room here. And then look at this little piazza area where at night there's these little lights like 23rd out there, Northwest 23rd, and we can have music or whatever you want to do, bocce ball. So it's really, I want to invite you to come out and just take a look at it before, if you're interested in building something like this, because there was a lot of thought made into this. And I think I've only covered a few. We have a meditation area too, that's for people that want to just kick back, and lots of places to sit.
Thanks, Nina. We need to talk about your contract with our marketing department. So as Nina said, it is a very large site. One of the concepts was creating sort of 3 different environments based on the different types of housing, but then within those, allowing an opportunity for community within each of those spaces. Because of the site size and the frontage along Gable Road, we also were required through zoning to have 3 access points going out, from the property. This is in an earlier conversation about working with different jurisdictions. But on this, we were able to use one of those only as an emergency access point, the one closest to Gable Road or to Highway 30. Because of the train tracks and it is an active crossing, traffic can kind of back up in that area. So we were able to work with the city on that. And then also the placement of the townhomes and senior building along the south and the kind of that front edge to the south. It was really about, creating a front edge, but keeping it open enough. So again, it didn't feel like it was being isolated from the rest of the community. This isn't in an area that has a highly developed neighborhood, but it is still a very active area within St. Helens. Again, with a lot of transport, car and foot traffic, bike traffic going by. The city of St. Helens is really looking to improve their overall city with relationship to multimodal circulation and bike paths and other things. So this was an important aspect to that. So I'm going to just walk through the design, that kind of what was developed out there a little bit. So the first piece was the family housing, because again, I'm going to keep saying this is such a large site. There was a lot of cost that we knew was going to be going into the property, just the development itself and the site work. City of St. Helens is developed on a lot of bedrock. So, there was some light blasting, Wendy, that was needed for aspects of the project, trenching, all sorts of things that you don't necessarily encounter on other sites had to be evaluated. And there was a definite cost to that in the overall pro forma. So really, it was about keeping the buildings relatively simple, repetitive, but in a way that could then be adjusted to the site layout itself because of the unique property lines and other angles to the property. So we started on the family housing. These are 3-story buildings ranging from 2 and 3 bedroom in size, 3-story walk-ups. But being able to start with the idea of the courtyard design, knowing and wanting to keep that connectivity. So splitting the buildings in a way that allowed them to form this community on site. As Nina talked, the buildings are designed double-sided. So there are the primary apartments both facing into the courtyard and then out to the outer edge of the circulation and the wetlands. So they are not kind of shotgun type units. So keeping that activity and those eyes in all those spaces being important. And then also, adding another layer with the connectivity of not just having the breaks between the buildings being those avenues, but creating the vertical circulation in a way that was completely passed through. So within the buildings themselves, the vertical circulation being another node where that transition from the courtyard to the outer circulation and parking can occur. And if any of you want to say anything more about the buildings or design, please hit me. Then the what we call the family townhomes. There was another portion of the development that's 31 3-bedroom townhomes. Again, this is multifamily, but they were designed in a way as sort of a transition to where as families maybe in what we call the more family housing are allowed to kind of grow within the community. They may, the family gets bigger, they have the opportunity to potentially move into one of the townhomes, also seen as a situation where it's allowing them from a living model to prepare for a market rate home in the future, that sort of thing. Again, though, trying to create this internal area and courtyard space so that it was not exclusive to people living in the townhomes, but created a little bit more intimate environment and community within that.
If I could, is if you noticed when we went back to the last slide, what the roof line was, and now you look at this for the townhomes, MWA created a different roof line just to give it a little different design and break it up a little bit and just add a lot more character to it.
Again, marketing, thank you. But it brings up a good point too, because as these do front along the primary roadway, again, we didn't want to create a solid wall of building. We wanted to allow the neighborhood and the community to be able to see in and out of the project. And those roof lines do create a different sense of scale and something that is a little bit more, I think, reflects house more than apartment to some extent, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And then the senior building that Nina talked about is a great space. We looked at, again, it's not exclusively senior, but it's a structured apartment. So there are secured entries and exits, elevator served. And we were able to kind of design it in a way where it did also front Gable Road, but provided some protection from that noise, as well as, and in the L shape, the courtyard is also protected to some extent from the late afternoon sun and heat. The natural site did slope towards that edge. So what we were able to do was, in working with Engage, create some space and understand spaces within this building that allow for some of that community overlap. So at that ground level, it's a daylight basement that opens into that courtyard. And it's a space that is considered a dirty space. There's a learning kitchen down there. There's also just open area for arts and crafts and other things. Within this building is also a library and more sort of social community space, seeing it as areas where that intergenerational connection can happen.
And because, we are doing a community for all ages, we do need to consider folks that will age in place in the building. So by pinpointing this building, which we call the senior building, but really it's building A, we are able to, create more accessible units, more sight and hearing impaired units. And, this is the building with the elevator. So this is the building that has the preference for folks 55 plus. So we can actually make a concerted effort to make these units, more accessible. So we are basically pinpointing that older generation. A lot of folks will age in place here. So we wanted to be conscientious of that when we're designing the project.
And then lastly was that community building, which is the commons and really is the hub of the project. I'd say I am going to go back in time. Going back to the site plan, we didn't want to, we wanted to place that building in the center. We didn't want it to have it out at the street, which is kind of a common area that you would place it in. So we really focused on creating a really orthogonal and sort of alleyway to it, so that when you enter the site, it's clear where you go if you're not living there. And then the other aspects of the property and project radiate off of that. And it serves, again, that conversation about connection. It really is the gateway to a lot of different aspects of the project. This particular photograph, you're looking through the space into that courtyard where the family housing is. And we looked at splitting that building apart so that there was a resident services side that was really connected to the needs of the tenants, along with more of the community-based side where people could, have activities and unwind and, use that space for, family gatherings and other things like that.
I just wanted to highlight something that we discussed as a design team, and that was how do we make these buildings more transparent? So each building has, and I think you can see it in this image, I call it the portal. There's a way that you can go from one side to the other without having to go around. So the senior building, building A, has that portal through it in the knuckle on the ground floor. The community building has that portal. The townhouse block has that portal. And the family housing, like Nina described, has those portals. So instead of doing discrete building blocks, we wanted to make sure that each building you could move transparently through to keep that intergenerational feeling. And so it was important that we kind of break up those masses to create that pass through. So at no point are you going around a building to get to the other side of this, 16-acre site. So I would say when you're designing these campus style projects, just thinking about the transparency through buildings and how people actually move, circulate through the space, and can they actually go through the building, not inside, but through it, so they feel a greater sense of connection to the community. And so we really concentrated on that, and the design is fantastic. And you can see that this building actually links the south side of the site to the north side, so you never have to go around that. You always go through it, and that was really the kind of design concept.
Yeah, and from a resident services perspective, we just really value and, just thinking about, community for all ages in this model and this campus style development, being able to be involved in some of those discussions about the design early on and thinking about how the property is going to function for the residents that are going to be living there and trying to engage in this intergenerational activity together. So there's so many wonderful spaces that were created through this design process through, to that lead people to be able to connect to each other. So having some common spaces that, like, this building here is in the center of the property and has a communal building where we do a lot of activity and programming. There's one in the senior building as well that's down at that lower level next to the wonderful bocce courts and lights and things. There's a lobby area in the senior building with coffee hours and things, a library space in there that we bring the kids down so they can be inside the senior building, engaging with residents. So just the thoughtfulness and the intentionality that goes into that design to really create the spaces that are going to lead to that more natural interaction with the different generations that are living there on site.
And I would just add, I think we all know that, early input is great on every project, but it doesn't always happen. So one of the things that Wendy really focused on was, again, maintaining that connection throughout the entire project. So even into construction and through the end of construction, the whole team was engaged, even if some of the work we were doing was early on. Also wanted to stress that just kind of showed some, buildings, but on a site this size, CDP really worked hard to integrate art into the project as well to create, again, reinforce that sense of community, and then how important the landscaping is. Both from a communal, gathering concept and aspect to just, some of those small details to make it a, feel like a home again. Now we're going to get to some programming conversation. I'm going to let Laura, take over.
Yeah, so Engage, we provide the resident services on site, and just to give you a snapshot of where we started, we've been a nonprofit operating, doing resident services for like 25 years, where we really started with a focus on senior housing and bringing arts into senior affordable housing communities. And over the years, we really started to embrace, the value that comes from intergenerational connection and programming. So we've really moved toward that, and so we just love being able to work with CDP on the CFAA model because we have all the ingredients we need right there. When we bring in intergenerational programming into our more traditional senior housing, we have to work at it, to create the intentional partnerships and programming that we bring into those senior spaces. But here we have the generations living together, and that's half the battle of intergenerational programming and connection. So in terms of the programming that we've done at Broadleaf Arbor to date, we really started with a lot of focus on the children because that was the first area that was developed. The senior building ended up being the last building that was completed and occupied fairly recently. So we did a lot of community building and art engagement with the children and the families. And now we are moving into a lot more of our intergenerational activities and programming. So we still like to really have some programs that are just for kids because kids need a space to just be kids, and adults need some programming that's just for them. So having some things that are, just intended for adults, like, an adult specific fitness class or educational workshops on parenting resources and other topics that are, more appropriate for adults. So we definitely still have, a lot of programming that, might be sort of specific for a certain target audience, but being able to have the intergenerational programming, right now, I think we're sort of in the phase here at this property of doing things that are a little bit more easy to connect the residents together. We do things in some other communities, and we're getting there at Broadleaf, where we do really intentional pairing of the generations to work together. Right now, it's really a lot of having opportunities to do things in a shared space across the generations. So we focus a lot on arts programming. And so having art classes where you have, the different age groups coming together and creating things in a shared space. Cooking classes are really big for us right now. We have 2 kitchens in this property, which is amazing. So being able to bring in, service providers that are teaching some classes and encouraging residents to teach some classes, it becomes a very intergenerational activity where you're sharing stories about food and your relationship to food and your history with food, from an older perspective and from a younger perspective as well. So we do a lot of cooking classes right now. We also do things like, taking advantage of the spaces that are in this beautiful property. So like a library hour where we meet up with the kids up at this clubhouse. It's in the center of the building near the family housing, walk down together to the senior building where we have a library space and have a story time there inside of the senior building so that we're able to, really integrate the kids into the senior spaces. And we also do a lot of obviously community-wide events. So, and those by nature of having an intergenerational community are intergenerational programs. So having, barbecues and potlucks and game nights and things like that, that really bring people together. And like I said, at this point, that's that more sort of natural coming together of just being in the community together with different generations, and the value of that. The other thing that we really are doing a lot of at Broadleaf Arbor that gets to the intergenerational programming is empowering the residents to play a very active role in the programming. We want them to, really embrace that this is their community and their voices are what matters. And we want them to share with us what they want to see in terms of the kinds of programs that we bring into the community, but also to help lead it. So, what kinds of skills and experiences do you have in your life that you want to share? So for example, we have a new resident that's moved in who is starting this winter. She's going to start teaching a sewing class to the teens in the community. So being able to share that skill set, that knowledge base that she has, right? So it empowers her to feel connected to the residents, to be able to share her knowledge and have that sense of purpose that's continuing for her to, connect to this younger generation. We have a guy who's teaching ukulele to the kids. So he has a teen in the community who comes in as his teaching assistant, and they teach ukulele to the young kids. So those are just some examples of, being able to really utilize those existing skills and those assets within your community to strengthen the community as a whole. So you're supporting the individual and having that sense of purpose and like being able to share what they have had value in their life and spread that knowledge to another generation and to be able to benefit all the kids in the community. I was going to speak more on the next slide unless anybody wants. You want to add some things about that part right now? Okay. I was going to talk a little bit about the why. Like, why does it matter that we do intergenerational programming? And, you know, what are the benefits? Like, how are we benefiting the residents that are living in this community through this kind of programming? And we hear a lot about loneliness right now, right? The Surgeon General and the World Health Organization have declared an epidemic of loneliness. And, you know, loneliness is something that's very common. It's a human experience. We all experience it at some point in our lives. But when it really escalates to like a downward spiral of not having the ability to connect to others in your life and the world around you, it has very detrimental health impacts. It can lead to mental health, anxiety and depression, premature death, dementia, heart disease, all kinds of things that are very serious. I've seen studies that equate it to a pack-a-day smoking habit. So it's something for us to take seriously and to try to address in our programming and in our housing communities. So that's when we think about who's most impacted by loneliness, it often is elders in our community that are facing loss in their own lives through loss of work or people in their lives, maybe their home, maybe losing some of their own capacities. And then young adults. So people who are sort of transitioning out of the family home and haven't yet really established their own family on their own. And they're facing a very uncertain world in today's society. So it's those age groups that we see most often identified as suffering from, these detrimental impacts of loneliness. So intergenerational programming is such a wonderful solution to that, right? Being able to connect across those ages and having a shared sense of purpose that comes from sharing skills across that generational boundary. And then arts, for us, being able to really focus in on arts programming. We do all kinds of things from, gardening classes and lifelong learning and health and wellness and things. But for Engage, our focus really is heavily on arts and creativity because of the health benefits that can bring for people. They say even being creative for 15 minutes a day, using your hands for some kind of creative outlet can lower your blood pressure and reduce anxiety and depression. So being able to combine, intergenerational programming and arts programming, building that sense of community has a lot of health benefits for people. And it really is, art as a sort of social intervention, and all these things together lead to a sense of a community that cares for each other and about each other. We love our big community events, the potlucks and the barbecues and all these things, but there's also something very special about the small moments that, you might have in a conversation over an art class or, in a small discussion group where you are going to have a deeper level of connection to each other than you might in just a quick connection at a larger social event. So while we love doing the big things for building the community, we also find a lot of value in those small moments.
All right. Also, this is the first CFAA that CDP developed. They have other projects that they've moved forward with. And I think we're, looking at, how to, measure and value the impact of the project. I think I'm going to hand it again over to Wendy and Julia to kind of talk about that. We all know not every project is perfect either. So there's things that you learn along the way.
Anyone who knows me knows that I love program impact evaluations because I want to know that what we're doing works or doesn't work. And so, when I've been with CDP for a little over 2.5 years, and when I first got there and started hearing about this concept, I kept asking, but why? And how do we know it's going to work? And I think I annoyed people enough with that line of questioning that we are launching like a formal evaluation process of the Community for All Ages concept that we're just going through right now. We've just finished the first phase of it, where we have really defined what are the outcomes that we expect to see as a result of all these intentional pieces that we've been speaking about. So on the last slide, we listed what are some of the expected outcomes that you might see from intergenerational programming. I don't think it's wise, though, to say that you're going to vastly improve people's health through housing alone, because there's so many factors that go into that. So I don't want to promise to lower people's blood pressure, but I want to know that it might happen for some people in some ways. So really thinking, very specifically about what are the outcomes that we can realistically expect to see coming from this concept. And then our next phase of evaluation that we're just about to kick off is designing the measurement tools that we are going to be using to actually see what the impact is on residents. So what does the resident experience look like? What does it mean for them to live in a community for all ages, housing concepts? And how do we know that their lives have improved as a result of the intervention that we're offering specifically through this concept? And I think, the measurement tools are going to look a lot like what you would expect to see in terms of, surveying residents, doing some intentional focus groups, also making sure that we are including the stakeholders, the other stakeholders in that process, which would include our community partners, our property management partners. What does it mean for them to have this concept in their community as well? So it's still, this piece is still in process, and we don't know exactly where we're going to land, but the overall goal here is not necessarily to prove that we're doing everything right. The goal is to understand what we're doing right, what we're not doing right, and how we can make continual improvements to the concept in order to meet the needs of the residents over time, because the needs of the residents today are not going to be the same needs 10 years from now. So we need to develop this measurement tool and continually implement it to make sure that this concept is meeting those resident needs and that we're adapting over time as well.
All right. And then the last slide is just talking about leasing and marketing. So, there's a tremendous need out there, but 239 new homes is a lot of housing to lease up at one time. And then with the idea of a more intentional community, there's also that marketing aspect that maybe is more important or influences on this type of project. So I think, Nina, you were going to speak to this first.
Just have a few things to note on this, but when we are leasing up, you do have to spend that time interviewing the tenant and finding out what their likes are and, where they, which building is it that they were thinking about staying in and everything. But one of the things that is important, and Laura was going over it about how important it is to, to let them know that this is a community where we are building assets, which is our tenants. And when Laura said, well, what do you like to do? Well, I'd like to coach this, or I'd like to do this, or let me lead this AA meeting here. I want to do that, because one of the things that we do is reach out to our community. Even though we're a development, we say, no, everyone from the city, you come on in, you want to hold a meeting here, you bet, this is your town too. And so we really open it up to the community. Leasing has been very hard to do because we've got project-based vouchers, housing choice vouchers, there's a lot of steps when you're dealing with the HUD side and also the LIHTC side and putting that together. So having plenty of staff, along with, taking care of the new maintenance things and the little, items that may not work for the first time or what have you, it just gets a little dicey, it gets just a little dicey. So, support is really huge, but also patience from the tenants is good too. Having tenant meetings where they can discuss their frustrations and things like that, so that we can say, well, how would you like us to do this? Would you like to help us out? Would you volunteer for this? It's again, building an asset-based community, that is intergenerational. And, when you go to live in a beautiful place such as this development, you feel like you live in a beautiful place. You will be proud of it. You would think. Now, there are some that say no way, but I'm just saying, when you look at it, you're going to go, wow, the art, the beauty, the woodwork, the ceilings, the windows, everything from the lighting it in the evening just to everything, the crosswalks that were painted, the children's food school lunch program in the summers with all the kids coming together. There's just so much great fun here. And I just think that building an asset-based community is important. And I don't think I really touched too much on leasing. Oh, well. But I would just say that, just getting as much help. You're going to need your action teams to help you because a lot of people cannot fill out an application. They do not have access to email. They just don't. And you need that extra time, and you don't want to burn out your peeps because they're so, so vital to the operation. Very, very vital.
All right. No, that was fine. Leasing and marketing is not the most exciting piece of the project. So, and we are pretty much on time for what our goals were. But I'm going to open it up to Q&A. Before that, though, I did want to just say thanks to someone. There's another organization, Urban Resources, Inc., that was heavily involved in the project from the beginning to the end. And they also didn't have the most glamorous job at times, but they kept us really focused and they kept the team moving forward, which was great.
Hello.
So just for the Zoom audience, I'm going to repeat. The primary question is, in an environment that's very diverse as a tenant leader, how do I get those residents to become involved and come together as a community?
One of the first things I'll say is sometimes it takes some time, right? You have to start with planting some seeds. But planting those seeds, they will grow. So we start a lot with, it takes building some trust, right? So having things where you can start to connect with the residents, and obviously you live there, so you have a slightly different perspective than like resident services. But I love to start in a new community, for example, with things like a food pantry or a food event. Food gathers people together. You start talking to them and sharing like what resources you have available, what kinds of ways you can connect, right? And that creates like, oh, well, I went to this potluck and had some food and got some resources, and oh, maybe I learned about this art class, maybe I'll go to that, right? So sort of planting those seeds and letting it grow a little bit, but also from resident services, we tend to do like surveys and things where we ask the residents, like, what do you want to see? What kinds of things do you want to do? What's a skill that you might want to share? So we tend to do like a yearly survey of residents, as well as just having casual conversations with them to find out what do they want to get involved in. And sometimes those involvements might start out with kind of a small group, right? But we look at that ripple effect, like the way that having that small group that comes together will start to spread and it starts to grow. So we always look for just those opportunities to empower the residents to play a really active role in what they're doing at the community, to listen to them and create spaces for them to be involved and to just try things out. Sometimes we try something and nobody shows up. It didn't really work. So we tried it. We try something else, or maybe we tweak how we're doing it. So we adjust a lot and we try new things and we empower the residents a lot.
I would just add the note of persistence, which is probably what everyone else in this room would say too. But, continuing to host your programming, even if only 1 or 0 people show up. They say the first rule of resident services is don't take it personally. And I always took it very personally when no one showed up. But it didn't mean that I could stop doing the programming. I still had to keep doing it. I had a property in particular in the New Columbia neighborhood where it took me probably about 2.5 years before people started engaging with me, of just sitting in the lobby and waving frantically at people, trying to get to know them. And I don't think that helps with keeping yourself going, doing it, because it's hard. But I think like that note of persistence is important in showing people that even if they don't show up, you're going to continue to show up. And that does really get to that trust building piece, where people know that even if, they don't come 1 month, they can show up the next month and you're still going to be there doing the same activity. So again, I get the feeling you're already doing that, but hopefully that's somewhat helpful.
Question? So the question was, in creating these portals through the different buildings, they're opening opportunities for that connection, but in some ways they're also dividing the spaces that may not support the programming as well as could be done if they were held together. I'm going to start with that question, just in that one of the things in creating those connections and those pathways through, what you'll notice, especially at the Commons building, is that everything, we live in a wet environment, but it's not necessarily a really cold environment. And everything is very well protected. So what we saw as maybe, as you pointed out, a separation of spaces, we really saw as a connection through both indoor and outdoor, because the way that those two portions work is that those areas open out into that center space, which is then designed with a lot of intent for light coming into that, so it's not dark. That particular case, there's a skylight at the very top of that roof peak that provides light both inside the community room and into that outdoor kind of communal gathering space. There's a lot of, again, large overhangs both at this building as well as the senior building and the family housing, where we've got the pass-through connections that provide the kind of environmental protection, but still allow for community building so that you're not scrambling or running to try to, get dry or be indoors. That's kind of my take on it.
I am curious to hear Laura's perspective, but I did want to say one thing about the Commons building and having the portal in between. On the one side is the big community room, kitchen and bathroom. On the other side is the property management and resident services office. And I think what I've been hearing over the last 1.5 years of leasing and occupancy is, and I'd love Laura to comment on this, is that the property management company is sort of the rule enforcer, and the resident services staff is the staff that folks go to, to get help or ask questions. And so when the residents enter the one side of the building, which houses both the property management and resident services office, they don't want to face the property manager, because the property manager is asking for rent and they're asking for the deposit and, where's your, what did you do wrong? And the resident services folks are there to solve the problem. So I think, in conceptualizing the next project, and we'll see how this works, I've actually separated the property management offices and the resident services offices in actually two separate buildings completely. So the two they never come together unless willingly. So I'm just curious to hear, Laura, what you think and how that's working on site.
Yeah, from a resident services perspective, we do find that residents sometimes have they have some issues with management maybe. And so we don't want to be a barrier to them coming in and participating in programming because we're a little too close to management, right? So we actually really always advocate for resident services offices not to be right next to management office, because we strive very hard to work closely with management and have a good relationship with them. But also understanding that, from a resident participation perspective, having a little separation between the two and making it clear to them that we don't work for management. We are there, working with the residents. And so having a little bit of separation there is a good thing. So having this, programming space that's connected by this, this covering, but separate from the leasing office and the management office is a good thing for us. So we value having it right there, but having a little bit of separation. But as Bill talked about, having that natural gathering area between the buildings that's covered from the elements.
A question? Yeah. So the question was kind of the financing dynamics behind a project like this. And okay. And what was the financing? Yeah. All right.
So yes, actually we are complete and we are scheduled to convert October 9th, 7th. Thank God. So this was actually a LIFT project, a LIFT rural project. And well, first the project was funded by a LAP loan from OHCS. So the Northwest Oregon Housing Authority purchased the property through the LAP program. Then after the land was purchased, yes. So this is just a simple 4% lift deal, and with a perm loan and some energy efficiency funds. So we had a considerable amount of lift funding. The project does have 75 vouchers, so it can support pretty good debt service. And with the economies of scale of 239 units, it does operate very well. But the LIFT program has been invaluable. And so, yeah, it was funded through LIFT. And again, it is one project. There's not a separate 8609 for a senior set aside building. It's really just seen as one 239 apartment building with 11 buildings on it and 11 TCOs and the whole thing. Does that answer your question? Sure.
Question? Repeated question is, the first part was just how the preference for the senior housing lease up worked with CDP. And then the second question is, this project had the opportunity of having a large site and being able to spread out and create all those open and connected spaces. And how would this project, or how would this concept work on a more dense urban site potentially?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a great question. We had many emails back and forth with OHCS's asset team, as well as our fair housing attorney. And really the way that we decided to do it was just do a simple preference. Of course, that cannot preclude, anybody under the age of 55. So if there's a resident that, comes to the top with a preference that's 55 and they have a younger adult living with them that's 16, we can't preclude them from living there. What we found, though, is that there is a high demand in Columbia County, Tillamook, and Clatsop for one-bedroom units. So we did find that many people wanted the one-bedroom units that weren't 55, that weren't only 55 plus. And so, the one-bedroom unit seems to be the sort of most desirable unit that we've seen from the wait list. Now, if we truly wanted to make sure, that we have a third 55 plus folks living there, we would do a set aside. As a team, we've discussed this sort of incessantly, that maybe we will do it. I'm not sure, but we didn't have as many folks 55 plus as we had expected. And maybe with turns and things that will become more of a third, 2/3. So the preference doesn't really guarantee, who you're going to get. We also have a model that is one building, community for all ages. We have not done one yet. And how that looks and how that preference works. And, is it set up by floor? I mean, how does that work? We haven't really, if you're thinking about an infill intergenerational building, I think you hear a little bit more of a pushback because, single adults don't necessarily want to live with families and kids going down double loaded corridors. So how do we get the best of both worlds? And can that really happen on an infill site? Julia, any thoughts?
Always. Yeah, I think with a larger site, there is so much benefit to giving people, access to green spaces that they might not have and all these things. I think the opportunities for residents to engage with each other assumes positive engagement, which is not always what you're getting. And so in some ways, I actually think having a smaller site might eliminate some of the opportunities to engage negatively with each other. And there might be some benefit there. Also like to touch back on like the idea of the portals and easily walking through the site. Residents can get around so easily. They don't have to walk, like Wendy said, all the way around to get to the other side. That's also true for non-residents who are accessing the site. So we have this beautiful space, lots of green space that other community members want to enjoy as well. And while we want to be integrated and part of the community, I think we all know that raises some challenges as well. So I actually think having a smaller site and a smaller footprint might eliminate some of the operational challenges that we saw as we started to get more and more leased up, in the past like 6 months or so, honestly.
Yeah, and just real quickly to mention, Engage, we do provide resident services at some other communities that are family-based housing that are more in one building like that aren't, really part of the CFAA model, but are intergenerational just in terms of having, a range of unit sizes and therefore family types that are living there. And yeah, some of the issues that come up are a lot of things that like Julia was talking about, like people complaining about the kids running around, riding the elevators around, having just like a smaller footprint for outdoor space. You get the teens on the playground with the little kids and it's some issues. So I think it's just in the larger campus, you have more opportunities to have different spaces that function for the different populations, but also create opportunities for people to come together.
Does that answer your question? Okay.
A question in the back? The question is, has CDP or this project in particular provided any resident emergency preparedness. I think I got most of that, so I'm going to hand it over.
We haven't yet, but that's definitely something that we have talked about doing. We've been doing some sort of safety related workshops and different things. So we've talked about emergency preparedness, and that is something, you know, we want to do. And I think in terms of an intergenerational lens, I could see, you know, just thinking off the top of my head, I could see, you know, rote information gets kind of boring for kids, right? So finding ways for maybe the kids to get involved in some planning activities or some exercises around the community or some things that might kind of bring them together to like partner up and talk about, you know, ways that they can be prepared in an incident. So we could have some educational campaigns that get a little bit more, you know, focused on kids as well as the older, just giving information to the adults.
For some reason, I'm thinking about like a Parks and Rec style emergency drill, you know, where like, where the parent or older adults and parents could be planning it and the kids could be running through the activities. I don't know where that came from, but it might work.
All right. Any other questions? I think our timing is almost on spot. So I think no other questions. Then thank you for spending the afternoon here. And I hope you learned something today.